Minty, I know you hear me. Get in here, gal. Crouching in front of the big barn door, Minty listened. Mrs. Brodess sounded angrier than usual. Get in here, I said. Don't you make me come and get you. Minty giggled and then stuck her tongue out just as far as she could. I'll come when I'm good and ready, she thought, but she didn't dare say it out loud. That would mean a whipping for sure. Pushing back the barn door, Minty crept inside. The barn was her favorite place. The dray horses watched restless as Minty thrust her arm into a large pile of hay. She dug deep down, all the way down to the bottom, and pulled out her rag doll. Esther Lavinia Louise was a sorry sight, with one foot missing and a pair of cracked buttons for eyes. But Minty loved her just the same. Now listen, she said. Then in a low voice, Minty started to tell an old Bible story, the way her mother had told it to her. And then the shepherd boy, David, he picked up a tiny little rock, took aim and sent it flying, hit old master smack in the head, killed him right there in front of everyone. Then they had a big party afterwards, and David got to move into the big house, and then at the long table, he was never hungry again or nothing again. When the story was finished, Minty hid Esther back at the bottom of the haystack. It was getting dark, so Minty had to light the fire, trim the wicks, and set the table at the big house. That evening at supper, Mrs. Brodie was still angry. Why didn't you come earlier when I called? I had a mess of peas needed shelling. Minty looked down at her. I didn't hear you call. Don't lie to me, girl, lest you want to rip it. Next time you better jump when I call. Mrs. Brodie shook out her cloth napkin. I'm hungry. Serve the potatoes. As Minty reached for the bowl, she accidentally knocked over a pitcher of cider. Mrs. Brodess jumped to her feet. Now look what you've done. Angrily, she turned to her husband. Do you see, Edward? It's just spite, pure and simple spite. Well, I ain't gonna stand for it. I don't want her in the house anymore. From now on, you're a field slave. That'll fix her. Then crossing the room, Mrs. Brodess opened the high cupboard doors and took something out. Minty's eyes widened. It was her rag doll, Esther. You didn't think I knew, did you? Mrs. Brodie said. Here, she tossed it to her husband. Take this and throw it in the fire. No, Mrs. Minty screamed. She lunged forward, but Mrs. Brodess was faster. With a flick of her wrist, she hurled the doll into the open fireplace. Minty kicked and screamed, but Mrs. Brodess held her back until there was nothing left but a pile of white ashes. That'll learn you, she said. Now get out of here, and don't forget, you're a field slave now. Minty ran out, choking back her tears. Later that night, while her brothers and sisters slept, Minty told her mother and father what had happened. Well, said old Ben, at least they're keeping you. What if they sold you south? I've seen them send them south for less than spilling a bowl of cider. Old Rit put aside her sewing. Come here, girl, she said. There's something I've got to say to you. Minty laid her head down on old Rit's lap. It was warm and soft, and she liked feeling her mother's hands as she ran it across her forehead. Listen to me, Minty. Now that you're in the fields, you gotta do a good job. 'Cause there ain't no other place but downriver after this. And you don't want that. Once they sell you south, there's no coming back. I'm gonna run away. I am. Minty said, I am. Old Rich shook her head. Oh, no, you're not. That ain't gonna never happen. You know what my daddy told me? He always told me, if your head is in the lion's mouth, it's best to pat his head. Your head is in the lion's mouth, Minty. I don't see you doing no patting. You're just fixing to get your head bit off. Old Rich bit down to whisper, please, Minty, pat the lion's head. It won't kill you. The next day at dawn, Minty was set to work in the fields. For the next 2 months, her job was to plant wheat, plant rye, and tend to the young corn. It was hard and heavy work, but Minty liked being outside. The breeze felt cool on her forehead. And sometimes, when no one was looking, Minty would push her toes deep down in the dirt and pretend she was a sunflower, rising up and up and up, way up, until she could see across the Chesapeake River, till she could touch the clear blue sky. Then July came, and with the heat and the mosquitoes, some days Minty could not even see what she was doing. She had so much sweat in her eyes. You gotta wear a bandana, said the woman next to her. Say, you're a little one. How old are you? I'm 8, said Minty. The woman smiled, holding out her hand. My name is Amanda. My name's Minty. That's a pretty name, Amanda said. Real pretty. Be quiet, said the overseer, knocking his whip against his glossy boot. Amanda lowered her voice to a whisper. Tell your mama to make you a bandana, girl, or you're gonna fry your brains out. Whenever she was working in the field, Minty kept looking for a way to escape. The dirt road behind the barn that led to the Choptank River, but Minty had no idea where the river went. And what if there were snakes there? Minty was scared of snakes. I know what you're thinking, Amanda whispered. I can see it in your eyes. You're fixing to run away. But they'll catch you. And when they do, she pointed to a deep scar on her forehead. Believe me, honey, I've tried. Believe me, it's not worth it. Later that day, Overseer Sanders rode up on his horse and pointed to Minty. You, he said, come over here. Running behind, Minty followed him down the trail to the Big Buck River. There, next to the bank, she saw a thick rope stretched across the surface of the water. Get in, Sanders said. But I can't swim, and the water's cold. Don't sass me, girl. I said get in there and take that rope. He watched Minty as she waded in the water. You see those traps over there? The steel ones? Those are muskrat traps. Mr. Brodus wants you to check every one. And if there's a muskrat caught, you stuff it in here. The overseer stuffed a heavy sack at Minty, then spat in the water. And don't you get any ideas now? I got eyes in the back of my head. Get here! Then Sanders spurted his horse off and galloped off. Slowly, Minty started downstream, holding on to the tight rope. The first 2 traps were empty, but inside the 3rd trap was a fat, glossy muskrat and was struggling to get free. Squatting down, Minty pulled the steel jaws of the trap apart. She glanced back to make sure Sanders wasn't looking. Then happily she let the muskrat go free, releasing him downstream. It swam away vigorously, propelling itself through the water with its long, flat tail. Minty's eyes were wide with excitement. Go, she cried, splashing in the water. Go, swim away. She hurried to the next trap and did the same thing, releasing a second muskrat into the cold, muddy water. She was prying open the third trap when she heard a soft noise from behind her. Sandy was sitting on his horse, not 10 feet away. For a long moment, he and Minty just stared at each other. Then suddenly, Minty dropped his trap and started to run. Sanders caught up with her at once. Jumping down, he bound her wrist together with a sharp piece of twine. "That was a stupid thing to do," he said. "You'll be sorry, girl." He took her back to the big house where Mrs. Brodus was on the porch cracking walnuts. She listened to what Sanders had to say. Minty never got a chance to speak for herself. "Whip her," Mrs. Brodus said, "and whip her good. And if it happens one more time, you tell my husband here, we'll sell her down south. They'll know what to do with her in Georgia." The overseer tied Minty to the fence. Then he roughly ripped open the back of her shirt. Old Rich was watching from a distance. As soon as she saw Sanders draw his whip, she dropped to the ground, her hands covering her ears. "Oh, Lord, let it be quick. Oh, Lord, let it be quick," she moaned. "Dear Lord, let it be over." Later, by candlelight, old Rit did what she could do to help Minty get through the night. "Now this'll hurt," she said, smearing some green salve on Minty's back. "Oh, baby, don't cry. Don't do it. Here, bite down on this. It'll help." She forced a hickory stick between Minty's teeth. "I told you not to aggravate them. I told you. Why didn't you listen, Minty? Ain't you got no sense?" It was several days before Minty could walk again. Then early one morning, she was sent back out to the fields where the wheat and the rye stood tall. But Amanda was no longer there. Minty learned she'd been sold south. "And you next," Saunders told her. "I got my eye on you." That evening, Minty told her father she was going to run away, and she meant it this time. "Oh, I believe you. Only problem is, you don't know where you're running to." "I want to show you something. Come outside, Minty." Silently, they walked toward the barn. Old Ben lit his old pipe, then pointed up to the sky. "Do you see that star?" he asked. "The bright one." "That's the North Star, Minty." "And do you see all the other stars around it?" "That's the Big Dipper. That's the drinking gourd," he said. "Now you listen to me. If you're gonna run, first of all, you gotta make sure it's at night. The darker, the better. And before you do anything else, look up and find that North Star. It'll be the only marker you'll have," he said. "It'll take you north, all the way to Philadelphia." Minty looked up at the dome in the sky. To her, all the tiny stars looked the same. "Show me again," she said. Old Ben pulled her close to him with his stem pipe and began painting a picture to freedom in the clear night sky. The next morning, old Ben told Rick every Sunday he was going to take Minty to the woods. If she's planning to run away, there's something she's got to know first. Rick didn't like the idea one bit. She was scared. Old Ben told her, "Stay out of it. I know what I'm doing." One of the first things he taught Minty was how to read a tree. "If you ever get lost," he said, "you don't know which way is north, just look at the moss growing on the tree. It always grows on the north side. Can you remember that?" Minty nodded. Then she stretched out her fingers and touched the yellow-green moss. It felt fuzzy, a little brittle. She scraped off a bit of the bark. "Don't eat it," Ben warned. "It'll make you sick as a dog." That summer, in the deep forest, Minty learned to catch and skin a squirrel. She learned to do bird calls. Before long, she could run barefoot through the forest without making a sound. She learned how to catch catfish with a tiny piece of twine and just a bent nail. And in the still muddy waters, she learned to swim. Old Ben taught her to swim. That's right, he said. Keep your head down. Don't move so much. You're doing fine. The only thing Minty couldn't learn was to start a fire. Old Ben watched as she struck the flint over and over again. She just couldn't get a spark. You'll just keep at it, he told her. You'll get it. On the last day of summer, old Ben and Minty took a tin bucket into the forest and filled it with blackberries. Then they climbed up a hill overlooking the river and watched the sunset. By the time they got back to the cabin, it was already dark. Old Rit put her hand in the bucket and laughed. I know just what to do with these, she said, pouring the plump berries into a wooden bowl. Minty, go up to the big house and ask the missus for some sugar and 2 cups of flour. Tell her I want to make a pie if she'll let me. Go on now, hurry back. Her bare legs shivering, Minty started up the dirt path. The night air was cool. Autumn was coming on. She had nearly reached the big house when she saw a buckskin mare tied to the old tree in front of the house. Minty figured it belonged to a guest, someone visiting the Broduses. The horse stood very still, watching her with uneasy eyes. Minty was about to turn away when a thought suddenly occurred to her. Reaching up, she placed her hand on the saddle. It was still warm and not too high. This is it, she said to herself. This is my chance to run away. Remembering what old Ben had told her, she looked up to the sky. There it was, the North Star, shining bright. By now, Minty's heart was beating repeatedly. She wanted to run to tell old Ben and old Rit she was leaving, but there was no time. It was now or never. Holding her breath, Minty reached for the rope. She tried to untie the knot, but her hands were shaking so badly. Then the horse let out a nervous whinny. Shh, Minty whispered, don't be afraid. But it was her own fear that was growing. Then just as the knot started to become undone, the door of the big house opened. Minty heard the master's voice. Come on outside, Nathaniel. Let's have a smoke. At that moment, Minty lost her courage. She couldn't do it. Not tonight. Not tonight. With tears in her eyes, she ran back down the hill to the cabin. At the door, old Rit caught her by the shoulder. Where's the flour? Did Mrs. say something? But Minty pulled and wouldn't answer. Leave her be, said Ben. Leave her be. Rit, I'll fetch the flour. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Minty sat next to the fire thinking, why hadn't I jumped on that buckskin? She could be long gone away, halfway to Philadelphia. She might never get the chance again. Minty began to cry. She cried for so long until the fire had nearly burnt itself out. It was getting cold in the cabin, and to keep warm, Minty buried her toes in the ashes at the edge of the pit. Minty sniffled, and she wiped her nose with the back of her hand. But someday she would run away. She would jump on the buckskin's back and ride and ride and ride to the north, wind whipping through her hair, and nothing would stop her, nothing. Minty could feel her eyes beginning to close. Then little by little, she fell asleep, curled up between her brothers and her sisters. She dreamed of the sunflowers and stars and the call of the whippoorwill. and a road through the forest that one day, when she had the courage, would carry her to freedom.